You've been told the Sahara Desert is a dead, empty wasteland where nothing survives. But what if I told you that beneath those massive dunes lies a lost world with cities, rivers, and millions of people? We aren't talking about myths like Atlantis. We are talking about a real, highly advanced civilization that figured out how to turn one of the harshest places on Earth into a lush, green paradise. Think about the Sahara for a second. What do you see? You probably see endless waves of orange sand, scorching heat, and maybe a lonely camel. It is the largest hot desert in the world, covering almost the entire top half of Africa. It's so big, you could fit the entire United States inside it. For a long time, historians thought this place was always a no man's land, a barrier that stopped people from moving between the north and the south. But they were wrong. Deep under the sand, and hidden in plain sight among the rocks, there is evidence of a massive empire called the Garamantes. These people didn't just survive in the desert. They mastered it. They built thousands of miles of underground tunnels, grew Mediterranean crops in the middle of the dunes, and traded with the Romans. But before we talk about their incredible cities, we have to understand the biggest secret the Sahara is hiding. The desert hasn't always been a desert. Imagine standing in the middle of the Sahara 5,000 years ago. Instead of sand in your shoes, you'd be standing in tall green grass. Instead of a dry horizon, you'd see massive lakes, some of them the size of small seas. This period is known as the African humid period, or more simply, the Green Sahara. It sounds like science fiction, but the proof is everywhere. Scientists have looked at the dust, the soil, and even the shells of tiny sea creatures buried under the sand to prove that between 11,000 and 5,000 years ago, this place was a garden. Why did this happen? It all comes down to the way the Earth moves. Our planet doesn't just spin like a perfect top. It wobbles. This wobble changes the tilt of the Earth relative to the Sun every 20,000 years or so. Back then, the wobble tilted the northern hemisphere just enough to change how the sun hit the land. This caused the African monsoon rains, which usually stay much further south, to march right up into the heart of the Sahara. These weren't just little afternoon showers. These were massive, life-giving rainstorms that lasted for thousands of years. The rain filled up giant basins, creating what scientists call Mega Lake Chad. Today, Lake Chad is a small, shrinking pond, but back then, it was larger than all the Great Lakes in North America combined. There were also massive river systems, like the Sahabi River, which flowed through what is now Libya. If you were there, you would have seen crocodiles, hippos, and even elephants wandering through forests and savannas. We know this because the people who lived there left us a photo album. Not with cameras, obviously, but with rock art. In a place called the Tassili and Niger Mountains, which is right in the middle of the desert, there are thousands of ancient paintings on the rock walls. These aren't just doodles. They are beautiful, detailed depictions of life in a world that no longer exists. One of the most famous spots is called the Cave of Swimmers. When explorers first found it, they were confused. Why would someone paint people swimming in the middle of a desert where there isn't a drop of water for hundreds of miles? The answer is simple. When they painted it, the water was right there. The rock art shows people hunting giraffes and ostriches. It shows farmers herding cattle. Think about that for a second. Cattle need a lot of grass, and a lot of water every single day. You couldn't keep a cow alive in the modern Sahara for more than a couple of days. But the paintings show thousands of them. This tells us that the Sahara was a vibrant, busy place filled with different tribes and cultures. These early people were hunter-gatherers at first, but as the rain stayed, they became some of the first people in the world to start farming and making pottery. They were living the dream in a land of plenty, but then the wobble started to shift back. Around 5,000 years ago, the Earth's tilt moved again. The monsoon rains started to retreat. Year after year, the rains came less often. The lakes started to shrink, and the grass began to turn brown. For most people, this was a catastrophe. They had two choices: move or die. Most people moved toward the Nile River in the east, which is actually what led to the rise of ancient Egypt, or they moved south into the heart of Africa. But one group of people decided to stay. They looked at the drying land and refused to leave. These were the Garamantes. While everyone else was running away from the encroaching sand, the Garamantes were figuring out how to beat the desert at its own game. They are the forgotten civilization of the Sahara, and their story is one of the most impressive examples of human grit and cleverness in history. For a long time, the only things we knew about the Garamantes came from the ancient Greeks and Romans. A famous Greek historian named Herodotus wrote about them about 2,500 years ago. He described them as a very powerful nation that lived in a land filled with wild animals. He said they used 4-horse chariots to hunt cave-dwelling Ethiopians who were fast as lightning. For centuries, modern historians thought Herodotus was making things up or exaggerating. They assumed the Garamantes were just a small tribe of nomads, like the Bedouin, who lived in tents and moved from well to well. It wasn't until the 1960s and 70s, and then more recently with satellite technology, that we realized Herodotus was telling the truth. The Garamantes weren't just nomads. They were an urban empire. They had a capital city called Garama, located in what is now southern Libya. This city wasn't just a few huts. It was a bustling metropolis made of mud brick houses, some of them several stories high. It had huge defensive walls, grand temples, and a palace for its kings. At its height, the Garamantes Empire likely had a population of over 100,000 people. To put that in perspective, that's a huge number for an empty desert. But the big question remained: how did they feed all those people in a place where it rarely rains? The Garamantes' secret weapon was their engineering. They realized that even though the surface of the Sahara was drying up, there was still water hidden deep underground. Thousands of years of rain from the Green Sahara period had soaked into the earth, creating massive underground reservoirs called aquifers. This is what we call fossil water. The Garamantes figured out a way to get to it without using modern pumps. They developed a system called fogatas. A fogata is a long, slightly sloping underground tunnel that taps into the water table. Because the tunnel is at a very gentle angle, gravity pulls the water out from under the hills and carries it down to the farmers' fields. This was an incredible feat of math and labor. To build a fogara, they had to dig vertical shafts into the ground every few dozen feet to provide air for the workers and a way to haul out the dirt. Then they had to connect those shafts with a horizontal tunnel. Imagine digging a tunnel by hand through solid rock and hard dirt in the dark for miles and miles. The Garamantes built over 600 of these Sahara systems with a total length of more than 1,000 miles. Think about the sheer amount of work that it took. This underground network turned the dry valley of Wadi al-Ajil into a lush oasis. Because the water was underground, it didn't evaporate in the sun. They used this water to grow crops that had no business being in the desert: grapes, figs, wheat, barley, and dates. They turned a wasteland into a grocery store. Because they had figured out how to survive and thrive in the deep desert, the Garamantes became the masters of trade. They knew the secret paths through the dunes and where the hidden water sources were. This made them the middlemen of the ancient world. If a Roman in Italy wanted exotic goods from Central Africa, things like gold, salt, ivory, or exotic animals for the Colosseum, those goods had to pass through the hands of the Garamantes. In exchange, the Garamantes got the best luxury goods the Roman Empire had to offer. Archaeologists have found Roman pottery, fine wine jars, and expensive oil lamps deep in the Sahara. They weren't just traders. They were also a military powerhouse. Those 4-horse chariots Herodotus talked about, they were real. We found rock art all across the desert showing these chariots. With these chariots, the Garamantes could move quickly across the flat desert plains, making them almost impossible to conquer. Even the mighty Roman legions found it difficult to deal with them. The Romans eventually realized it was much easier to just be friends and trade with them than to try to hold on to a desert kingdom they didn't understand. The Garamantes were a complex society. They had a clear hierarchy with a powerful king at the top and a class of elites who lived in the big cities. They also had a unique language and writing system called Libyan Berber. We can still see their inscriptions on rocks and tombs today. It's a script that looks like a mix of dots and lines, and it's the ancestor of the Tifinagh script used by the Tuareg people today. They were also very serious about how they buried their dead. Instead of simple graves, the Garamantes built stone pyramids. They aren't as big as the ones in Egypt, but they are just as impressive in their own way. Thousands of these pyramid-shaped tombs are scattered across the Libyan desert. Inside, archaeologists have found jewelry, weapons, and food for the afterlife. Everything seemed to be going great for the Garamantes for nearly 1,000 years, but they were facing a problem they couldn't solve with engineering. The problem with fossil water is that it's a non-renewable resource. It's like a bank account where you keep taking money out but never put any back in. Because the Sahara had stopped receiving rain, the underground aquifers weren't being refilled. Every gallon of water the Garamantes used was a gallon that was gone forever. Around the year 500 AD, the Sahara system began to fail. The fields started to dry up, the grapes died, the wheat stopped growing. At the same time, the Roman Empire in the north was collapsing, which meant the trade routes were falling apart. The Garamantes were losing their water and their income at the same time. By the time the Arab armies arrived in the Sahara in the 7th century, the great cities of the Garamantes were mostly ghost towns. The once mighty empire had broken apart. The people didn't all die, though. Most of them probably went back to a nomadic lifestyle, becoming the ancestors of the Tuareg and other Berber groups. They took their knowledge of the desert, their script, and their traditions with them, but the empire of the sands was gone. The world forgot they ever existed. For over 1,000 years, the Garamantes stayed hidden. But in the 21st century, we got a new way to look for them, from space. Archaeologists have started using satellite imagery to look for patterns in the desert. From space, you can see the perfect square shape of the walls and long lines of fougera shafts. These satellite photos have revealed hundreds of previously unknown settlements, forts, and irrigation systems. We are realizing that the Garamantes Empire was even bigger than we thought. Every time we look at a new satellite map, we find more evidence of their genius. We are literally watching a forgotten civilization emerge from the sand in real time. The story of the Garamantes isn't just a history lesson, it's a warning. They were a society that built its entire wealth on a resource that was running out. They were masters of their environment, but they couldn't control the climate. Today, we are facing our own challenges with changing weather patterns and shrinking resources. The Garamantes show us what is possible with human imagination. They prove that humans can live and thrive in the most impossible places. The Sahara is still full of secrets. Every time a sandstorm moves a dune or a new satellite takes a photo, we get a little closer to understanding the people who dared to build a garden. If you want to see more about the hidden history that the world tried to forget, click the video on the screen right now.